Okay, the first thing that I want to do this week is to give you definitions of some of the terms that Kant uses. These are terms that show up a lot in Kant's writings, but they also show up in other philosophical texts and outside of that too. So these are terms that you may read in newspaper articles or books or things like that. So these are good terms to know if you don't already know them. So the first term is a priori, which refers to knowledge or judgments that are not dependent on sense experience. Okay, so these are things that I can know, or judgments that I can make, even if I don't base that on some sort of evidence from the senses. So for instance, I can know that 5 plus 7 equals 12 without going out and finding 5 things and 7 things and counting them together. Okay, so this is how you can do more advanced mathematical problems without having to find sensory experiences to justify that. Okay, advanced multiplication and things in geometry, for instance. This is also true of propositions or statements, claims that we make. For instance, the proposition, all bachelors are unmarried men. That's something that I can know a priori because I don't have to go out and look at all the bachelors in the world to know that they're unmarried men. Now with a posteriori judgments, or knowledge, these are dependent on sense experience. So it's not possible to know that these claims are true unless we have some sort of evidence based in the senses, some kind of observation. So there are 5 apples on the table. We can know that that's true by looking and counting how many apples are on the table. And also the example that bachelors tend to earn less money than married men, that would be something that we couldn't really just claim. We'd have to go out and do some research to find out if that's true or not. Okay, so that's an a posteriori judgment. The only way to verify it is by some kind of experiment. And this is what we often call empirical inquiry, evidence. Now, this is based on sensory observation. So the empirical sciences are sciences that are based on our sensory observation, what we can see and touch and measure, quantify. Those would be empirical sciences. Same would be true for some of the things that Kant says in the article. Empirical judgments, for instance, are based on experience in some way. Analytic judgments, or propositions, are those in which the predicate is already contained in the subject. So we need to give another example. All bachelors are unmarried men. The subject of that proposition is bachelors, and the predicate is unmarried men. And so with an analytic judgment, what we're saying is that in some way the predicate, unmarried men, is already contained in the concept of the subject. So if you know what a bachelor is, you know that it contains the idea of being unmarried. You can't be a married bachelor. And it also contains the idea of men. Okay? So women are not bachelors, maybe bachelorettes, but the idea of bachelor contains that predicate within itself. Now with synthetic judgments, we have propositions or judgments in which the predicate is not already contained in the subject. And so that means that the predicate adds something to our knowledge of the subject. So in this case, our subject is bachelors again, and suppose the proposition is that all bachelors are messy. That predicate, messy, is not contained in the subject bachelors. Maybe that's a stereotype or a general impression people have. But the idea of messiness, that's adding something to our knowledge of the subject, bachelors. So that's synthetic. It expands, it adds to our knowledge in some way of the subject. And so the only way then to investigate that would be empirically. A posteriori judgments where we'd have to go out and do some research. We'd have to look at the bachelors in the world and see if that claim holds true when we look at the evidence. So that's a synthetic judgment. Lastly, a maxim is a principle of the will. In other words, the principle by which one chooses how to act. And this is going to be important with Kant's ethics because everything depends on the maxim of one's actions, and the principle by which one makes a choice or a decision about how to act. And so when you see him talking about maxims, that's what he means. It's the principle of the will.